lovelies, welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Amy and I'm a cruelty-free makeup enthusiast and blogger. So if you clicked on this video and you saw the title of this video, it's not clickbait. I wish it was, but it's not. So I'm gonna do a get ready with me story time. So if you're interested in hearing about this story, then keep on watching. I just zoomed you in a little bit closer just so you can see what I'm doing. I will list all the products that I'm using in the description. I have never done anything like this before. I'm going to preface this video and say that it's the strangest thing. It's something I completely forgot that this even happened. And then my husband and I have been watching so many true crime videos and documentaries. We watched I'll Be Gone in the Dark, and then we watched all of those cold case episodes that were on Netflix. I'm a huge fan of Bailey Sarian as well. So I don't know if this just sparked this memory in me. And then it's funny because I haven't thought about this in years, and then my husband and I were just talking about all this stuff, and then the story, I just like remembered it and we were talking about it. So I figured I would do a story time and then I could talk about that while I get ready. So where do I start this story off? So I grew up in Western Connecticut in Fairfield County. Now most people, if they know about Fairfield County or they've heard about it and they've never lived in the area, they always think of Fairfield County as Lower Fairfield County, which is like the really wealthy areas like Westport and Greenwich. But I grew up closer to, well, pretty close to the border of New York State, and the town that I was raised in was, you know, working class, middle class, and then there were some families, of course, that were pretty wealthy. But we lived in a very New England town, and so not much really too much happened there while I was growing up. You know, we always had weird kind of stories go around. Funny enough, the one famous crime from my town before the one that I'm going to talk to you about was actually called the wood chipper murder. And yes, you can Google this. It was a real thing. Back in the 80s, I want to say, some doctor had murdered his wife, and then he had put her through, well no, he froze her, and then he put her through a wood chipper to get rid of her body. So the way that this man was caught, interestingly enough, was that he had rented a wood chipper in the middle of a winter storm, which is not really a common thing to do, and he used a credit card, so they were able to trace it, and yeah, that guy was found guilty. Interestingly enough, my parents actually kind of knew that family, and they always said, yeah, you know, he seemed really weird. I guess their daughter was in the same grade as my brother, and my brother was 8 years older than me, so they had always kind of talked about that. It was like this really infamous thing. I think all that they found of her was like some of her fingers in Lake Zor, which is a really, again, very strange story. I don't know why I'm like laughing. If I kind of laugh like that, it's just because all this stuff makes me really nervous, and I don't know. That's the way I kind of deal with it. So anyway, that has nothing to do with the story I'm about to tell you. But basically all you have to know is that this was a very safe town. Not a lot went on. In fact, it was pretty much considered boring by most of us growing up there. So flash forward to, I'm in middle school maybe. This is like the early 2000s. I had made friends with a girl named, let's just call her Anna, and that's not her real name. But Anna was the sweetest girl ever, and we had become friends, and we had a lot of mutual friends as well. So she had started to invite me over, and then I came over for sleepovers. I think the first sleepover that I had was her birthday, and all my friends got together and we watched Center Stage, because Center Stage was, you know, like newer at that time, and it was just so much fun. And I remember her family being super sweet. They lived in this really beautiful, like almost ranch style. I don't even know if it was a ranch style. I guess I would consider it that, but it was a beautiful open home with really high ceilings. Their upstairs was kind of open, so you would go up and the stairs were kind of like above their living room, so you could kind of see people going up across upstairs. And I remember she had an older brother and an older sister, and the older sister was much older. And I hadn't thought of anything at the time, of course, but I think her older sister may have been like 19 or something. Like, she was much older than us, maybe even, she may have been even in her 20s at that point. I can't really remember. From what I remember of her older sister, though, I have this really sweet memory of her. A hummingbird had gotten into the house, and the hummingbird was like in her bedroom. And I remember their bedrooms had these really tall ceilings with these really big windows, and the hummingbird had been in there. But it was such like a lovely house. They had a lovely property. Where I grew up, people tended to have a good amount of land. So like where I grew up, the house I grew up in, there was a 2.5 acre backyard. And so we would always have, like, again, living in a deciduous foresty area, we had beautiful animals that always came through. But she had, I remember, there was a barn on the property, and then there was a field of wildflowers. That's kind of what I remember. And that's pretty much like what I mostly remember from my experience there. I slept over there a bunch of times. Her family seemed very nice. You know, I do have this memory of her mom yelling at her sister, but that was pretty much it. We had the birthday party there. Her dad was really nice. I remember him coming in for the birthday party, bringing in like Coke or Pepsi or some kind of soda, and we all had a really good time. And I never thought of anything about that. So this is, you're gonna be like, Amy, what does this have to do with anything? Well, I stayed over this house several times. I slept over it a bunch of times too. And then as you get older, you know, you're still friendly with people that, you know, we grew up, we went to the same high school. She was, again, sweet as pie from what I remember. The story doesn't really have anything to do with her. She's completely innocent with this, but she was sweet as pie. And, you know, as you get older, you kind of grow apart from people. And I think the last time I maybe went to her house was when I was in like my first year of high school, I want to say. So I hadn't really hung out with her after that, but we would always say hi to each other in the hallways. And then fast forward to years later, I'm in college. So I went to university for my undergraduate at a university very close to the town that I grew up in. In fact, it was probably like a 20-minute drive from where I grew up in. So when I was in college, I was in a sorority. And several of my sisters actually worked in the town where I grew up in, because it was so easy to find a job, you know, a couple towns over from where we were going to school. So they were working at a supermarket. And then funny enough, who was working at that same supermarket was my old friend Anna. So this wasn't the first time they had mentioned that they had met people from my hometown, because working in my hometown, they would see people around our age who said, oh yeah, I went to so-and-so high school. They'd say, oh, do you know Amy? And they'd be like, yeah. So they would tell me all the time, you know, they would come into our sorority meetings and be like, oh, I met someone who you went to school with, and we would talk about it, and that would be, you know, really sweet. So then cut to my senior year of college, and it was probably springtime, not too long before I graduated from getting my bachelor's degree. And so I was in a sorority meeting, probably one of the last ones that I went to, and my sorority sisters say, hey Amy, do you remember how we talked about Anna, your old friend? Did you hear what happened? And I said, no, I haven't heard of anything. And I'm like, what is going on? And they're like, oh my God, we have something to tell you about her father. So they tell me her father's been arrested for murder. And I said, what? And they said her father's been arrested for murder for, I guess he killed his wife. And I went, wait, what? I was like, wait, like the wait, what? Like my friend's mom? So then it kind of brought me into this rabbit hole. I immediately had to go online after the meeting and research it. And what I found was incredibly disturbing and terrifying. And then I learned that I had slept under the same roof as a murderer. So here's where the story gets very strange. So in 1984, my friend's father had a first wife. So the woman who I had known as my friend's mother, that was his second wife. But if you remember, I had mentioned that she had an older sister that didn't really resemble her or her brother, and she was older. So I guess that would make sense, you know, that that would be a second marriage. That, you know, of course, when you're young, you don't even really realize things like that or recognize things like that. In 1984, my friend's father had gone to our local town police department, and he had reported that his wife had gone missing. So apparently they had already filed for divorce. It is known that, according to the police reports, that this woman had actually confided in her sister-in-law and said, "If I die, this man killed me," which is very, very strange. Apparently, this was a cold case for more than a quarter of a century. They never figured out what had happened to this missing woman. You know, it seemed very strange because she had a very young child that she had left behind if she did take off, which obviously she didn't. But nothing had ever happened. The case went cold. So fast forward to 2010, the property in the town that I had grown up in had been sold. So a man and his son had bought the property, and they were going to convert the barn that was in the property into an apartment. They figured that they could, you know, make some money off of it. And that was super common. Like where we lived, people always had these kind of additional either in-law suites or barns on the property, again, because a lot of property, they were a little bit older, so they had all these kind of like additional rooms and spaces to rent out. So the father and the son that now owned the property were kind of looking through everything, clearing everything out. They find something very strange in the barn. They end up actually digging up the floor of this barn, and in this floor is a cistern, and in the cistern they find bones. They didn't know what it was at first, but they were pretty confident that it was human remains. I forgot to mention that the man who did buy this property was an actual doctor. So he had noticed that one of the bones in the cistern reminded him, or at least appeared to be, a small human femur. So later that day, after the doctor reports these findings, state troopers arrive. And the state troopers had pulled out more of what was underneath the floor. So in the floor, what they had found was all this bedding, like pillowcases, sheets, and that had the body, or remains of the body, had been wrapped up in. And they had realized quickly upon looking at the old cold case photographs and the original research that went into the disappearance of this woman that they matched the bedding from photographs that they had from this family previously. So they knew immediately what had happened once they had looked into it. So the police report actually describes that the woman's body was wrapped up in these blankets and she was placed headfirst down into the ground. And then when the medical examiner had reviewed her remains, they found her maxilla, which is her upper jaw, had been traumatically removed from her skull. They also found that both of her arms had been broken, which means that she was probably trying to protect herself. So then, of course, this man was arrested, and then he spent the rest of his life in jail. I think he died not too long ago. And when I had first found that out, I had a chill that went down my spine. I've never felt so uncomfortable and disturbed, and you know, my mind just thinks about being in that house with him and, you know, sleeping under the same roof as him and what that poor woman also went through. And then I feel so bad for the family having to deal with all of that. And I have to admit to you that my memory is not the absolute best, but I do remember the barn, and we were either playing growing up, we were playing around the barn, or we were playing in the barn. And to know that that woman's remains was underneath my feet or very close to where I had been, it's just this very unsettling feeling to know that I was that close to something so horrible that had happened. Alrighty guys, so that is the story. I wish I had a happier ending for you. You know, it's one of those just really weird things, a memory I kind of put away and kind of like locked away, not thought about in a very long time. So let me know if you want me to do more storytime videos when I do get ready with me's. Normally I do a lot more positive things. I try to keep it very positive on this channel. My takeaway from this is that, you know, if you know anyone who's in any type of really toxic relationship or domestic abuse situation, please report it, please get help. I think that's the best thing that we can take away from this really sad story. So that is it. Thank you again for watching, my friends, and until next time, remember to stay compassionate and chic. Bye.